Welcome back to the channel, it's Viking Actual here. I'm going to be bringing you another ESO build video. Different from last time where we looked at increasing our raw damage to something over 80%, I think we got to. This time we're going to be looking at increasing our damage of status effects, as well as increasing the damage of our damage over time effects. We are again a base class Dragon Knight. It's my favourite build. And this time it really does serve a purpose within the build. We've then subclassed in Animal Companions again from our Warden's abilities, and we've also taken Gravelord from our Necromancer. We'll get into those a little bit later on, but for this build I think they work the best. The only one that you potentially could swap out, I think, would be Animal Companion, swapping it for something like Herald of the Tomb. I just find that sometimes that one, it works well in the PvE, but doesn't work as well in something like PvP. Getting into our stats. So we've got really healthy resource pools in all three, with 18,000 magicka, over 31,000 health, and 23,000 stamina. You'll notice that our recovery pools aren't as high as on our other build, but they are still sitting above where I like to, so I normally, as a rule of thumb, will sit above 1,000. We don't run out of resources on this build, and there's a few abilities as well as passives that help us regen those resources. Looking at our offensive stats, we've got over 4,000 weapon and spell damage. That is with using a maul, so we are using a maul currently. If you had a preference that you wanted more weapon and spell damage, you could swap to a greatsword, and that would take you to 4,300 weapon and spell damage. Spell criticals are sitting at 33% for both. Some of our passives then increase this further under certain circumstances, but we'll get into that later. But they do go up quite considerably. And then we have our spell penetration and physical penetration at 9,000. So that's from using our maul. With abilities and with some of our class passives, this goes up tremendously. We've got no need for a penetration monster set, and we have no need, unlike the other build, for a penetration ultimate. The raw penetration of this build will knock them down 2/3 of their resistances. It is amazing. Looking at our own resistances, we are sat at a base of 25,000 spell resistance and 24,000 physical resistance. This build tends to have slightly lower resistances, but it picks up its tankiness in other areas, and when we get into the abilities I think you'll see why that is. And then our critical resistance is about 1,850. It looks a lot lower than the previous build, but I assure you, once we look at some of the sets that we're running, you'll notice that it actually ends up being a lot higher than our last build, which adds to some of our tankiness. Looking at attributes, which I think I missed in the last one, so our last build was 14 into health, 15 to stamina. This time I didn't think we needed the health. We still sit above 31,000. So we've got 14 into magicka just to help us with that resource pool, and then remaining with 50 into stamina, so stamina Dragonite essentially. Using the Thief Mundus to increase our critical resistances. You'll see this build is a little bit more spec'd into critical damage and critical chance, and it's all linked to our Mythic. We're using our Jewels of Mistral. Smoked Bear Haunch will work better than this. I just use this because it's nice and cheap, but it increases the recoveries of both magicka and stamina, and then increases our health. I think the only thing that Smoked Bear Haunch will do better is maybe a slightly bigger increase to recoveries and a definite bigger increase to our health, but I think it's within hundreds of difference, so nothing major. I've already mentioned the Thief, and you'll notice that we aren't running a Vampire for the Undead passive this time. Oh no, we won't do skills yet. Let's go into our inventory so we can have a look. So we've got a Pyrebrand Maul. On the enchant, I'm using flame damage. I think you probably could get away due to our abilities and the set. You probably could easily get away with putting an Oblivion enchant on this, so you're hitting through those shields, and so you're hitting through them blocking straight for their health. So I think that would be a change that I would make in your build if you were to copy this one. And then obviously it's sharpened just for that extra 3000 penetration. In terms of the set itself, Pyrebrand, it is a Dragon Knight only set, and it is in the Infinite Archive, so you have to farm that to get it. The 2 item set piece will give you offensive penetration of 1500 or just under, and then the 3 and 4 will give you your weapon and spell damage increase. These stats are unbuffed, keep that in mind. 5 pieces, your light attacks deal over 6000 damage over 6 seconds. So unbuffed, you're dealing 1000 damage a second just off of your light attacks. That's just a light attack dot that applies. So you'll deal your damage with light attack, albeit 4000, plus the 5000 thereafter, 6000 thereafter every second, so 1000 every second. That is what you're mainly going to be using this for. It just keeps applying that pressure along with our other dots, just keeps chipping away at them, trying to keep them essentially on their back bar, so they're constantly having to try and heal because their health is constantly going back down. The set does have another ability or function, which is its heavy attacks. You won't see it used as often, but as this build doesn't have an execute, this will provide one. So a heavy attack will deal 4000 damage in a 6 meter radius on the target, and if they're below 33% health, will deal up to 200% more damage. In addition, if they have, or you have put a damage over time effect, I believe on anyone or on them, for each one it will increase the damage done by it by 20% up to 60. Meaning that your 4000 damage, which is unbuffed, will deal 260% more damage if you've got 3 damage over time effects on them and they're below 33% health. So that's just a nice bonus, but realistically you're using it for the light attacks. So our front bar set, Pyrebrand. Back bar set, you'll remember me mentioning that we don't need much critical resistance, so we don't need to run all in pen. Rallying Cry is why. So our back bar, we're using an axe and we're using a shield. The shield is reinforced with a health enchant, taking our health to 32,000, and just to increase our resistances on our back bar. With the front restoring magicka, helping with our healing and our resource pools, as well as defending for further resistances. The set itself, 2 pieces increases crit chance, 3 increases magicka, and 4 increases crit chance again. So really nice extra crit chance, especially with our heals, which can then critical, as well as increasing that max magicka pool for things, some of our abilities, both healing and offensive. But the main reason you're running this is the mix-up of this defensive, offensive 5-piece. So when you're healing critically strikes, which with our high crit chance and some of our abilities on our back bar, lots of heals over time, you're pretty much guaranteed to get this within a few seconds of activating an ability, as long as you're within a battle spirit area. Which means that you and group members within 12 meters of you will gain 1,650 critical resistance and 300 weapon and spell damage for 20 seconds. That takes our critical resistance to well over 3,000, so a lot more than the last build, and obviously gives us an extra 300 weapon and spell damage. Each group member decreases these values, so 15 per group member for the weapon and spell damage, and 83 per group member for the critical resistance. And the effect can proc every 15 seconds. So it lasts for 20 and can be procced every 15 seconds. So it's an 100% uptime set that deals in both increasing your survivability and tankiness, as well as increasing your healing. But the weapon and spell damage will also be applied to all of your damaging effects, and abilities, so it also helps increase your damage. The last set is our monster set, which we're using Mighty Chudan's Visage. We're using this because we're using 3 offensive skill lines that do not have the buff that this gives. So just to go through the set, it increases our armor by 1500, increases our health by 1200, and then the final one is that it gives us major resolve at all times. So what would have been like Hurricane or all of those different shielding abilities, we have it on us all the time without having to use one of those, because we don't have an ability in either of those skill lines that provide it. We're running it tri-stat, and it's a heavy, so we're using reinforced. So because we don't have to use in-pen on this as much, all of our heavy pieces, which is our head, our chest, and our greaves, are all reinforced. They're all tri-stat apart from the legs. We then have medium shoulders, medium belt of the trainee, so we get extra health from that. Light gloves, rallying cry is a light armor, which is why we only have 1 armor piece. Both of our jewelry pieces are rallying cry, and then our 2 back par pieces, so that we don't have to run too much light to increase resistance. And then we've got medium boots. So all the mediums and lights are in-pen tri-stat, and all the heavies are reinforced tri-stat with just 1 on health. Looking at our jewelry, same as last time, all infused weapon and spell damage with stamina recovery. You've obviously got the 2 rallying cries, and then our mythic. So for our mythic, we're using Monomyth Reforged. This is the new mythic in the Solstice DLC. This means that while on our front primary combat bar, we gain Major Force, Minor Berserk, and Minor Vulnerability. For those that don't know what the buffs do, Major Force increases our critical damage by 20%, Minor Berserk increases our general damage done by 5%, and Minor Vulnerability is actually a debuff on us, increasing our damage taken by 5%. There are ways that you can then obviously mitigate this, so some of our CPs will help with this and essentially remove that. So we don't need to worry about that as much. You won't notice it, but you will notice a 20% increase in critical damage, and then obviously it's nice to have that Minor Berserk for damage done, although that's not what we're focusing on. And then the other part of this, the flip side, is when you go into your back bar, you gain Major Protection, Minor Vitality, and Minor Timidity. Major Protection, decreasing your damage taken by 10%, Minor Vitality, increasing your healing and shields by 6%, and Minor Timidity is like the opposite of Minor Heroism, so it drains your ultimate over time. But I found that if you're in combat, you're getting hit, you're hitting other players, it goes up faster than it will ever go down, so you actually will still be increasing even if you're sat in your back bar, so you won't notice that debuff either. And that is all of our equipment. Moving on to our skills. So front bar, we have Deep Fissure. This is what we're going to use to apply our breach, both major and minor breach. So 10,000. So we're already on 9,000. Plus another 10,000 if we hit them with this. 19,000 penetration. It also deals really great magicka damage. So the first one will deal nearly 10,000 once it's buffed, and then the second one will deal between 13 to 15,000. So really, really heavy hitting, and it also gives us our breach. Next, we'll call it a spammable, but it's not a traditional spammable. You'll notice that the tooltip isn't massive. That is because of how this ability works. So the bottom part, you'll notice when you activate a different Ardent Flame ability, so it doesn't proc itself, but the other Ardent Flame abilities, you gain a stack of Seething Fury, increasing the damage of this by 20%, and increasing your weapon and spell damage by 100 for 15 seconds, and that can be stacked 3 times. So on this build there are 3 other Ardent Flame abilities. If I'm in combat and I activate all 3, this will deal 60% extra damage and give me 300 weapon and spell damage. Now the only frustrating thing is that as soon as you activated it, those are gone and you have to do them. That includes, as far as I'm aware, the weapon and spell damage. If it's not, then that's great because it's 100% uptime, because you just keep applying those Ardent Flame abilities, but I think it does remove them. Next, another Ardent Flame ability. Some may say it's a waste having this one on there because of the Major Breach, but what I like is the fact that it applies poison damage, and in fact it will apply the poison status effect to everyone it hits, which is new as of the new update. So while you may not be using this for the Major Breach, or you might be, because it's a really quick and easy way to apply Major Breach to a large group of enemies in front of you, you're mainly using this for the dot to increase your Firebrand and to chip away at the enemies, but you're also using it for the poison status effect, which will proc some of our passives, and is also classed as execute damage. So when they get to lower health and they've got this on there, it deals increased damage. So really, really nice, and that is why we went for this morph rather than the other one, Engulfing Flames. Another unusual choice, because a lot of people will go for the other morph of Searing Strike. We went for Burning Embers. We don't need a guaranteed poison status effect because we have that now from our Noxious Breath. So we go for this one so that we can guarantee at least 1 burning status effect on an enemy. And it also provides a heal over time as well as a dot. So it means that the initial damage, which is about 4, maybe 5,000 damage, you'll heal straight away. That's a nice little burst heal. But then all of the dot damage will also be classed as heal towards you as well. So if you apply this to someone, you're constantly essentially healing off of their pain. So really, really nice ability. It's also not too expensive, and it's got a duration of 24 seconds. So this is why I said we don't need as much sustain, because these two last for 24 seconds. So unless you're reapplying them to boost this, you can just leave them on there for 20 seconds and watch as this person frustrates themselves on their back bar, melting away. Our last front bar normal ability is Deceptive Predator. This is instead of Birds of Prey, because we already have the minor Berserk from the Monomyth, so we don't need the other morph. So this gives us our major exposition exactly the same, our immunity exactly the same to snares and immobilizations, but instead of Berserk gives us minor evasion, reducing our damage from area of effect attacks by 10%. So it just adds a little bit more tankiness onto our front bar as well. So it's really, really nice, and it means that we can still stay mobile and still benefit without wasting our minor Berserk. And then finally, our ultimate, we've got Pestilence Colossus. Essentially a large area of effect ability that you place on the ground, and then over 3 seconds will hit 3 times. The first one dealing, these are unbuffed, but dealing 10,000. The next one a little over 10,000, and the final one 11,000. And it will apply the diseased status effect and major vulnerabilities to all enemies hit for 12 seconds, and that increases their damage taken by 10%. So you can boost all of those stats after the first hit, or maybe not all, but the second and third by a further 10%, as well as all of your dot damage and all direct and single attack damage by 10% to that player. So really, really nice damage ability. It's also quite cheap and is dealt in an 8-meter radius. On our back bar, we're using a sword and board rather than a staff. So we're running a spell wall. It's a really nice cheap ultimate that will get you out of jail for free, basically. It means that you can automatically block all attacks at no cost and reflect all projectiles cast to you for 7 seconds. So it gives you 7 seconds to breathe, heal, collect your thoughts, and then go again. If you were going to flex this and you wanted to run something like a staff on the back, the ability that I would probably suggest you put on is something like Reviving Barrier. Although it's a fair bit more expensive, it is an actual alright ability in its own right, but it also gives you the benefit of the passive of 10% increased magical recovery, which is nice just to get some extra recoveries. Back onto our ability, we have exactly the same scribe heal that we did on the other one, so Healing Soul, with the restores magicka and stamina, obviously stamina to the bank. 600 magicka is basically a refund cost, so it's a heal that only costs 3,600, so really, really nice. It will heal for over 10,000 once we've buffed up using some of our other abilities, and then obviously on our back bar would then have Major Vitality and Minor Vitality with Monomyth, meaning that we've got 18% increased healing on our back bar, which will buff all of our heals over time. So we've already mentioned one, which is Searing Strike. We're now going to move on to two of our other ones, which will also benefit from this. So Searing Strike an extra 12%, and the next two an extra 12%, extra 18% as well, as long as we're sat on our back bar. We've definitely went unconventional with this build. I will say a lot of people would tell me to go Flames of Oblivion, but I feel that with all of the dots and all the other abilities, we do have enough damage, and because we are lacking some of the resistances, heals over time are our friend. So we've went with Cauterize, and I think this is a very underrated ability. What it means is rather than orbs being fired out at enemies to deal damage, they fire at you and friendlies to heal you. So you and up to 4 allies every 3 seconds, once this is buffed, will heal for about 5,000 health. So every 3 seconds you get a 5,000 health burst, which is really, really nice, especially when you think about that will increase off of any weapon and spell damage increases. We've got 600 once you take into account the Molten Whip, Seething Fury, and the Rallying Cry. And then obviously later on in the build we've also got our Major Brutalities, which will increase it for a further 20%. So, 5,000-6,000 easily every 3 seconds just helps you just keep your health up. It's also relatively cheap because it's only 3,000, and it will last for 15 seconds. So over time, it's actually quite a big heal. Slotting it also gives us our Major Prophecy and our Major Savagery, which is essential, and it's what's enabled us to get up our rating so high. Next, like I said, you will not find a PvP build that doesn't include this, or I'd be very shocked if you had. Resolving Vigor, another heal over time. So really, really nice. Will be buffed by everything that we've just mentioned, and it also provides us our Minor Resolve to go with our monster set, giving us Major to increase our resistances by about 10,000. So heal over time and increased resistances. I really, really do mean unconventional. A lot of people here are going to say, why have you not put Blast Bones on? Blast Bones is a fantastic burst ability, and I think if I didn't already have a delayed burst ability in Deep Fissure, I would probably slot it. But I didn't want too many abilities that I had to wait on to deal damage. Plus, if we look at the number of damage over time effects that I've got, status effects, this, I've tested it, was the best choice for the current build. So what it means is that you summon a skeleton from the ground, it leaps into you, sacrificing its soul, and for 20 seconds you increase your damage done with Necromancer abilities. So that's your Pestilent Colossus increased, and also your damage over time effects by 15%. So with the Major Vulnerability from Pestilent Colossus plus this, that's a 25% increase to those second 2 hits, and obviously all of your damage over time effects increased by 15%. So really, really nice ability, and it lasts for 20 seconds, which will boost some of the passives, which we'll discuss in a minute. And then finally, same as last time, the Bull Netch, our wonderful sustain ability, which is for free, restoring stamina back to us and providing that major brutality and sorcery, as well as that nice cleanse at the end, so we can keep our negative effects down. To move on to some of our key passives, I'm not going to go through all of them. So for the Dragon Knight ones, increased our stats effect damage for burning and poison by 33%. Really, really nice. We're constantly putting it on enemies, so just to increase that damage by 33% really helps us out. And obviously the sustain of when you apply either of those, giving us the 423 magic and stamina every 3 seconds, is also nice because that's constantly going. Just constantly, all of our attacks are flame or poison, so we are constantly regenerating that stamina. Warmth, this is another 6% increased damage over time to those particular players if you've hit them the direct damage ability that's in the flame ability slots, which takes your damage over time to 21. It will increase a lot more, will go on, and obviously gives them the snare. This will just increase the abilities, so Fiery Breath and Searing Strike for an extra 4 seconds, and then obviously the World and Ruin, increasing all of our flame and poison attacks by 5%. All of our abilities are flame or poison, so it basically means that everything that we're hitting them with will hit 5% harder, along with the Minor Berserk, so an extra 10% harder. And then obviously Major Vulnerability, if we put that on them, there you go, 20% extra. So we are still hitting hard, and it's with nearly all of our abilities and all of our status effects. Animal Companion, I think, won't go too much into this, but every time one ends, we get some health, some ultimate. I mean, you just can't miss out on that extra sustain, so a really, really nice sustain passive there, 20% extra in our Magicka and Stamina recovery. And then finally, if we swap to our front bar, 10% extra critical damage, along with our Major Force from the Monomyth Ring, so extra 30%, so we're at 80% critical damage because of those two abilities. And then the biggest one is probably the Gravelord passives. These are really, really nice. So this one is, it will decrease the cost of our skeletal Gravelord Sacrifice, and it takes it to about, I want to say 600 Magicka. So it costs next to nothing. It will last for 20 seconds. You don't have to apply it very often, and obviously it's super cheap to sustain that uptime because there is no cooldown. When I said earlier that our critical chances will increase, this is what I was referring to. So obviously we're already on 33%. If the enemy then drops below 33% health, that then shoots up to 53%. So we're hitting basically every other attack is a critical hit. Now when I say that once I'm buffed and you've got Seething Fury and you've got Rallying Cry, the Molten Whip alone can hit for nearly 20,000. You then apply crit into that, you're still hitting really, really hard, as well as constantly chipping away at them. So really, really nice passive. We also have it all the time because we've got a Necromancer ability on the back bar and front bar. Another really, really nice one, Necromancer gives us Dismember, which means that while a Gravelord ability is active, so Gravelord Sacrifice for a whole 20 seconds, we have an increased 3,271 penetration. That's nearly as good as some 5 set pieces. So, you know, back in the day when the Rave was all about Stun's Favour, I think that was about, what, 5,000 increase. This is nearly, it's just as good as that, and it's just a passive. And we have it as an uptime for 20 seconds. Which means with everything else, we have 12,000 base. If we then take into account Major and Minor Breach, that's over 20,000, 22,000 penetration, which means you're going to be hitting most average players. You're going to be knocking over two-thirds of their resistances out, completely wiping it out. You're going to hit through it, which is fantastic. And then the last one that's really, really nice is damage done with damage over time effects increased by another 10%, taking all damage over time effects to 32%. And then lastly, to quickly finish off, I'm not going to spend too much time on the green CP. They're pretty much the same. Gifted Rider, Breakful, you're going to be falling out keeps. Do not miss this off, you will regret it. Rationer to increase our food and drink. Liquid efficiency, so our pots will last a little bit longer. Will go further, not last longer, go further. And then I use this just so I can move around the map out of combat a little bit faster, increasing our movement speed by 20%. Moving over to our blue skill tree, we have Master at Arms, increasing the damage of that Molten Whip and Deep Fissure by 6%. I'm going to butcher the name, Thaumaturge, increasing damage over time effects by 6%, which I think now will take us to 38%. 15, 10, yes, yep, so once we've got everything ready, 38% increased damage over time, so that's all of those abilities that were mentioned. That's your Pyrebrand, that's your Searing Strike, that's your Noxious Breath, all increased by 38%, so they're going to be hitting hard. We then do have a defensive set, because we don't need the crit resistance, we're not going for that, so we've went with a single target damage. Attacks will hit us 6% less. This is what we use to mitigate that minor vulnerability on our front bar, because most attacks are going to be hitting just us unless it's area of effect, in which case minor evasion saves us. So it basically means that that buff doesn't exist for us. We've cancelled it out, which is really, really nice. And then we have our Untamed Aggression to boost our weapon and spell damage to that over 4,000 mark that I like to stay at. Just a really quick note, in here we do have this so we can apply the magical stats effects even more often. If you wanted to see what a magical or a martial stats effect, if you go to the next one, it will then tell you. So this will affect Magicka, Flame, Frost and Shock damage. So all of those things, Slope, our Pyrebrand, all of that is going to be proccing 60% more and have 100% extra damage. So Deep Fissure, Molten Whip, and Searing Strikes all have extra 100 weapon damage on their attacks. And then finally, red CP, we have Celerity for our movement speed, we have Survival Instincts to make all core abilities 25% cheaper while affected with a status effect. That helps us just to roll dodge, it will help us to break free, it just helps us get out of those really sticky, slippery situations. Pain's Refuge, so when we're getting hit in return with loads of status effects and negative effects, we become more tanky, 2% for every 2 negative effects. And then finally, Fortified to increase our armor. We are already lower on armor than the last build, so it's important that this stays on there just to make sure that those armor stats are up. Finally, I think it's the only thing left to show you is the buff stats. So if I apply all my buffs and I go to my front bar, you'll see that we're just under 5,000 weapon and spell damage. Obviously the critical ratings go up to 50 if we'd got them below low health, and then we've got our 12,000 penetration. That's then obviously 10,000 on top with our Deep Fissure. If I quickly reapply this, you'll see that on our front bar we're at 27,000 on our resistances, and on our back bar 31,000, so we can remain quite tanky. And that is essentially it for this build. So you still get a decent increase to your damage with everything taken into account. You're still at about 20, maybe more percent increased raw damage, but then obviously you've got that 38% increased damage over time. So comprising the two together, you're still hitting probably for just as hard. It just means it's harder for them to heal back up. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the build. please consider liking and subscribing. All the support is really, really appreciated, and I will catch you in the next one.